There's no reason for people in a society as wealthy, resourced, and technologically advanced as this one to not be thriving. Every crisis we are exposed to hourly is completely predictable and preventable if we connect to a shared vision of everyone thriving. Surviving the day is just not acceptable anymore when we know that thriving is actually possible. Welcome to the 100% Future podcast, where Dr. Katherine Ortega Courtney, Dominic Cappello, and me, Rubina Cohen, as your host, share insights, action plans, and inspire you weekly to take bold action in designing thriving communities for all. Welcome back, everyone, to our first episode of the 100% Future podcast. As you know, our last episode was our pilot episode, and technically this is our first episode, and we have a really important and integral topic to jump into today. Really is the foundation of all the work and why this work is being laid out with my colleagues, Dr. Katherine Ortega Courtney and Dominic Cappello, back in the studio to jump into this important topic today. Welcome back, guys.
Hi, good to be here.
All right, so today we really want to dive into ACEs and what this is actually, Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey, and what this is exactly and how this has been what shapes what the 100% New Mexico initiative is all about. So I'm going to let either of you who wants to jump into this important topic first.
I want to tell the story about how I learned about ACEs because it was a game changer for me. So I was working for juvenile justice here in New Mexico at the Children, Youth, and Families Department. I distinctly remember I was sitting in my little cubicle. It was after 5. I was working at a flex schedule at that time. And I saw this email, and it was like one of those e-blasts, like, oh, this new research paper came out. And I clicked on it, and it was adverse childhood experiences are connected to basically everything. And I was like, what? This is what I've been looking for as a researcher in juvenile justice. How do kids end up in the system? How do they end up in protective services? And basically it said, we can predict what's going to happen in adulthood based on what happens in childhood if these 10 things happen. And I'll let Dom talk about each of those 10 things. But to me, it was like this light bulb going off. I had been doing research on trauma, and I had noticed these patterns of kids in New Mexico in juvenile justice. All of them had like traumatic events happen. And this research put it all together in just such a concrete way. And then when I realized this had happened, this research had come out, decades before.
Wow.
It was like, why aren't we doing this? Why don't we concentrate on this? And I sent it to like all of my colleagues, everybody in juvenile justice. I was like, this is the key. This is the thing. If we can prevent these, we can, change the game. And of course, the story of getting here was a long way from that. But that was, to me, this research was absolutely what I had been looking for as a researcher, as a psychologist. Like, this is the key to why people struggle with substance abuse, crime, all of the things that we're trying to prevent. And this research had come out in, I think, 1997, something like that.
98.
Yeah.
Wow. So, and I keep saying wow because, I felt the same way when I first learned about and took the survey myself. So what was their reaction? What was, when you sent it to all your colleagues, like when you were like, why aren't we focusing on this? What was the reaction?
Deafening silence. Yeah. I mean, some people were like, oh yeah, that's cool. But, we're doing this. We don't have time to like shift what we're doing, or that's not our job. We're here to intervene once things happen. It's not our job to prevent things. That's, a different department. That's Department of Health or someone else. But yeah, nothing was done based on that until, 7 years later when we started the Anti-Age Aid Institute.
Right. I guess I would say that I remember getting an email from a nonprofit in Seattle, and it said that they are addressing adverse childhood experiences. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. I was working for the New Mexico State Department of Public Health at the time, and I read the description of the program. Essentially, this nonprofit had. They were describing the study that was done by Dr. Folletti and team, decades ago. The study that looked at the adverse childhood experiences of adults. So the study looked at adults, asking them, look back to your childhood. What did you experience? And to be clear for our listeners, this list of 10 adverse childhood experiences, it's pretty hard to hear if you're imagining our children enduring these every day. But the list would be physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, living in households where adults have substance use disorders, or adults are engaged in domestic violence, or have untreated mental health challenges. Parents may be divorced or separated, or a family member is incarcerated. So, as you listen to that list, I think that honestly, I think our brains have a hard time processing that. I mean, to take all that in, as in, if that's your life, if you're an 8-year-old and that's what's happening. Now, the study was significant because it looked at what happened to you in childhood and then what happened to you in adulthood. They wanted to see, would that have any impact in terms of your physical health or your emotional health? And of course, every listener will go, well, how could that not impact your life? So,
Absolutely.
but that's how I first heard about it, getting the description, learning about the study. I could talk a little bit more about my concerns about their particular prevention process. I had a lot of concerns about what they thought could prevent it, but I'll stop now in terms of just letting our listeners think a little bit about how mortifying it is that our kids, as I'm speaking, are living in households where this is happening.
I know. And I can just say from my own experience, I grew up in a family of 5 kids. I'm one of 5 children, and, we were dealing with potentially 9 out of 10 of those. And so, and really not having access to solutions or services, and having to be resourceful on our own and becoming adults at a very young age because the adults in our lives didn't know how to address those as well. And then just like removing ourselves from just even like adulthood, but like lacking communication, parents lacking communication on how to talk about some of these things, and cultural restraints in how to talk about some of these things. Not even having an environment where you could like just share that this is going on. It's a lot. It's a lot to deal with and bear. And I mean, I would like to say, like, my particular personal circumstance, things have turned out quite well in my life. And I'm so grateful for that because I was able to find help and go through that journey and have some support in finding the right people to help me. But that's not always, and in many cases, true for a lot of our children in our community.
Right. I'd like to say 2 things. I'm glad you brought up you're referencing family culture, and are we allowed to talk about these things, or are we allowed to ask for help with relatives? And I do remember going to my aunt. Now, this is an Italian American family, very traditional in many ways. And this was my favorite aunt. And I did bring up the fact that my mom was really struggling with a lot of issues that were leading to ACEs. And her reaction was, we really don't talk about those things. And I can't tell you how shut down I felt. Like, it would take me years, and I mean decades, to ever feel strong enough to talk to people about what was happening in my own life with a score of 5 out of 10 ACEs.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And I think that's probably relatable for so many people. So yeah, talk a little bit more about the sort of potential recommended solutions and why they're just not effective. And then let's maybe tie that back to the 100% New Mexico initiative a little bit for our audience.
I can tell you that when I saw the prevention strategies from this group out of Seattle, now I was coming at it from a place of knowledge in that I was working within the Department of Health. I had colleagues who worked in child welfare. I had an understanding of what this would mean. And the recommendations from this nonprofit were, well, we should have seminars to talk about it with the adults or providers, and we should make sure that our kids can talk about it. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, we would like every adult to be talking about it. We would like every healthcare provider and teacher to be talking about it. And we certainly would like to create very safe spaces for young people to share. But if that's your only strategy, we're not going to change the rates of ACEs.
Mm-hmm.
So I eventually did reach out to this group, and I said, families need behavioral health care, and beyond that, they're going to need medical care and stable housing and food, all the services for surviving and thriving that make a family healthy and safe and resilient. And their reaction to me was, well, we don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
We just think initiating seminars, that's really going to be helpful. And quite frankly, I was appalled.
And I had a similar experience working within CYFD. Let me talk a little bit about how CYFD works with families. So calls are made to a central intake, right? Of those calls that are made, so this is a concerned, neighbor, person, whoever it might be, calling to say, hey, I'm concerned about this kid or this family. Of those calls, the vast majority are screened out. So nothing is done. Of those that are screened in, those get assigned to an investigator who goes out and determines, is this case substantiated or not? Of those cases, the vast majority is not substantiated. So here we have, and this was my frustration working in the department, families who are clearly, at least at some level struggling, have some kind of issues, maybe need some help. Those calls get made and nothing happens until things get bad enough for them to get screened in and substantiated. So to me, there was this huge opportunity to, let's get these families
–
services at the get-go instead of waiting for things to get so bad that the child is removed from the home and put into foster care. Like, why wouldn't we be doing that as a state, as a system? Most child welfare systems operate the same way. It's an intervention. It's just like Dom said, let's, wait until things are bad and then talk about it, or let's intervene after things have gotten bad. To me, it was always a huge missed opportunity to let's get people the support and services they need immediately so that things don't escalate. And that is how you prevent ACEs. It's not intervening afterwards. And I think most organizations have a intervention mindset rather than a prevention mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And it's understandable because it's more tangible to say, well, we served this many kids. We had, this many kids put in foster care. You can't measure prevention as easily, and it takes longer. So it's not as appealing to, funders who want to show an impact, or legislators who want to be able to say, we did X in my 2-year term, things like that. It's a really, really long-term solution. And it makes it a lot harder to get excited about because it's harder to show success. Our initiative is probably a 10 to 20 year initiative, if done correctly, to really show, look at this next generation of kids that don't have ACEs now. That's going to take a while.
Yeah, I'd like to add that, as Catherine said, you have to have a long-term vision.
Yeah.
Because these problems are huge, but that doesn't mean we can't have significant successes along the way. But the first thing you have to do, if you are concerned about ACEs, and we should make it very clear that adverse childhood experiences appear in all families of all socioeconomic levels.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just problems on the other side of town. It's everywhere. I know plenty of middle class and up people who as children endured horrific experiences. So money didn't take that away. But imagine if you're suffering all these problems and you have very little money, you have no access to services, or your community has no services. So I think that in what we call maybe the ACEs world, people who are good-hearted people wanting to do the right thing, but they don't necessarily have a framework that allows them to see big picture. It's not just getting kids sharing their feelings, though we would like every child to be able to share their feelings.
Absolutely.
It's about understanding this is systems level work on a city, on a county, and on a state level, involving many, many people. And when we finally get into our initiative, you'll see that there are, 3,000 moving parts to ACEs prevention, and it's all doable. And we are showing how it's doable. But I think that 10 years ago, what I'm saying would have been incomprehensible. People working in so-called ACEs prevention.
I mean, okay, so wouldn't it be a great world where, yes, these children are sharing their feelings, and then that is the catalyst that allows parents and people in the community to be like, okay, here, and now we have this 100% community initiative with the 10 vital services. They know exactly where to go once the child has expressed what they're going through. That could be an amazing, huge step forward in the right direction, correct? And then, so to me, that feels like a great segue to talk about some of the successes along the way, Dominic, that you mentioned, and how within the 100% New Mexico initiative, can a community realize some of these successes? What do they look like? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, we're one of the few initiatives that start with a book club. We've talked about our book, Anna Age 8, and it all starts with just getting a few colleagues or friends together and to say, can we read the story of Anna and what happened to Anna? And what did ACEs mean to Anna and her family and her teachers and her community? A lot of times, I know when I love to say, there are 3,000 moving parts to this initiative. But the truth is this: you start with a simple book. You start with a simple book club. It's that easy because every group that has come together, and our initiative is done county by county. So counties aren't having to save the world. They are having to focus on their own county and their own services. But it starts with a very lovely experience of sharing people's insights when they read Anna's story. So that's how it starts, because you have to start with awareness. You do start with people talking, but that's just the start. That's not the end strategy. That's the beginning of a series of strategies. And every county that has started with the Anna Age 8 Book Club has started a 100% New Mexico initiative. Her story is that powerful, right? And Rubina, I know you've read the book. It's a very simple story, but you can't read that, or we've certainly discovered that people don't read that and feel apathetic about it. They feel moved to act.
Beautiful. Catherine, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think one of our goals with Anna was what Dawn said, was to make it real, but also to, we had a chapter called Mothers Not Monsters or something like that at one point, because what we saw in child welfare was, this outcry like, oh, this mom is evil and awful, and how can this happen? And that was kind of the way people looked at child welfare was, these parents are awful and these kids need to be taken away. But when you dig into the cases, you see what circumstances led to these parents to be in these situations. And so often it had to do with lack of resources, lack of, stable housing, food, things like that. The vast majority of child welfare cases are neglect. They are not physical abuse. And neglect is very often directly related to lack of resources, lack of access to things like housing and food and basic needs. And we wanted to tell that story. And as we said last week, Anna's mom grew up in the child welfare system as well. And that's what ACEs do if we don't intervene. They cycle, they create generations of trauma, and then that trauma gets passed on to the next generation, which is why it is so important to prevent that, to break those cycles. And that's really our goal.
Beautiful. Well, we're already towards the end of our podcast for today. I feel like we could talk about this for hours, which is why we are dedicating to being back here every single week. And we are going to jump into another very important topic for our next podcast. Dom, do you want to just talk a little bit about what listeners can expect about the next topic?
Sure. Well, we look at two interrelated challenges, and you really can't disconnect them. The first one would be adverse childhood experiences, but the other one would be what we call, using public health language, the adverse social determinants of health. These are the 10 services that determine a child's health, safety, education, and overall quality of life.
Beautiful. So today we mentioned the Anna Age 8 book. That will be linked in our show notes. If any of our audience members wants to purchase the book, they will be able to purchase it via the link, but it's also available on our website. It's available at Amazon. So there's a variety of places that people can go. Our website is 100nm.org. And yeah, we will jump into the adverse social determinants of health. I'm learning along the way too.
Great.
So we will see you all next week, and ready to jump into that topic next week. Thank you all for being here, and say bye, everyone.
See ya.
Bye.
Join us on the road to 100% New Mexico initiative at 100nm.org to learn more and get access to the podcast show notes. Want to stay more actively engaged with the movement? Then follow us on Facebook at 100% New Mexico and on Instagram at 100%NM. Until next time, let's take bold action to create a 100% future for all.